Before MK Ultra, there was Operation Paperclip. Out of that operation came Project Chatter and Project Artichoke. Follow me down the rabbit hole to find out more. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we're talking about three different things, actually four. So we're going to talk about Operation Paperclip, Operation Lusty. Well, I mentioned that kind of just in passing. Project Chatter, and Project Artichoke. So as I was doing my research into MK Ultra, I realized that we have to talk about all these things before we can talk about MK Ultra. So before we get into it, if you are ever interested in gold, silver, precious metals, you want a membership that comes right to your door, visit our sponsor, Wise Wolf Gold and Silver. You can go to rabbithole.gold or visit the link in the show notes to learn more about that. All right, let's do it. Operation Paperclip, which was originally called Operation Overcast, and it's sometimes referred to as Project Paperclip, was the program to bring German and Austrian engineers, scientists, and technicians to the U.S. after World War II. This program was only supposed to last about 6 months to a year, with the idea being that they would bring over some big brains. They had been on the other side, right? So they would be able to help America win the war against Japan, because Germany had surrendered, Japan had not, so that was the thought. But after August of 1945, the war was over, and the program did not end. It just continued going, because they realized, well, yeah, they could have helped us beat Japan. What else could they help us with? So, with the end of World War II, there was now a race with the Soviet Union to seize as many German scientists as possible. Not just scientists. I feel like I always just say scientists, but it's engineers, technicians, doctors, scientists, anybody that was creating something really big. That's who we were going after. All of this was ramping up for the Cold War. So basically, it was like, if we don't get these guys to our side, then they will go to the Russians or the Soviets. So we need them on our side. The program really started in 1945 after the fall of Germany. As the Allied forces advanced into Germany, they realized just how talented the scientific community was. And Germany had invested a lot of money and time into their scientific research and had made tons of advances. Unfortunately, it was usually at the cost of human lives, Jewish lives, anybody that was in their concentration camps. They were doing human testing when other people would not have done it, right? So, like, I know we have pretty strict rules here in the U.S. that you have to do, like, regular trials, and then you have to do animal trials before you can go to human trials. Like, it has to be pretty safe before it can go to a human trial. Yeah, in Germany, they didn't care. They didn't care about any of that. They're like, you know what? Let's just put it in a human and see what happens. Or do it to a human, like whatever it was, right? Let's do it to just like a real human, because that's how we're going to know if it will affect us in whatever way. But also that's where we got like the Heimlich maneuver. Heimlich is a German word, right? So you have, here, choke on this and let's see how we can get it out. How many people do you think died from choking before they realized like this is the best way to get something out of your throat? Nuts. It's crazy when you think about it like that. At the beginning of the recruitment, they were really focusing on like the rocket program, aviation, chemical, biological warfare. That's kind of where they stayed focused. They did bring over other scientists, doctors, people, but that's kind of where the focus was. But it didn't end there. They wanted all the top minds in Nazi Germany. They had actually compiled a list of the people that they knew of that were working for Hitler, and this list reached about 1,600 names. Those were the people they wanted to come here and help us out. So the U.S. was scouring prisoner of war camps, hospitals, refugee camps, everywhere, looking for anyone that was on this list. Because, like, what if they're in the hospital and we didn't know it. So every day somebody would go through and be like, okay, here's so and so. Now you're going to come to the US and you're going to work for us. And from the sounds of things, it doesn't sound like it was hard to convince these guys because most of the Nazis preferred the West over the Soviet Union, knowing that they would get better treatment, and if they didn't comply, they would potentially be named war criminals. So if they didn't come here, they were going to go there, and if they didn't go there or come here, now they're war criminals and they're going to the Nuremberg trials. President Truman didn't want to use any members of the Nazi Party. So he was like, hey guys, yes, bring over scientists, just don't bring over Nazis because like they're really bad. But if they weren't Nazis, then you can bring them here because there were like a bunch of scientists, There were some scientists, some doctors, some people that weren't necessarily part of the Nazi Party, but those guys weren't the top of the top. The top of the top were going to be working for Germany or working for the Nazis because Hitler wanted those guys. So he was recruiting them throughout the war and before the war. So the people that hadn't been recruited by Hitler probably weren't as intelligent, was the idea. So General Patton ignored President Truman's order. He knew that they wouldn't get any scientists worth a damn if they weren't members of the Nazi Party, for the exact reason I just explained. In fact, this is another example of the military-industrial complex going behind the president's back and doing just whatever they want to, regardless of the consequences. They don't care. General Patton, along with Allen Dulles and General Dwight Eisenhower, decided to deal with the short-term consequences over the long-term gain. So they're like, well, this will be better. Forget whatever the president says. He'll be out of here soon enough and we'll have a new president. I mean, he probably didn't know it then, but President Eisenhower, or General Eisenhower, was going to be president soon. So they went ahead and gathered any and all of the top scientists, and they kept these guys safe from harm. They were like, yep, we need these guys alive. We need them to come over and teach us as much as we can possibly learn. So let's protect them. I mean, we had like scientists such as Dr. Werner von Braun, Dr. Arthur Rudolph, and Dr. Hubertus Struckhold. And they came over to help us develop NASA. These three, for example, wouldn't have been allowed into the U.S. under Truman's rule and would have possibly fallen into the Soviets' grip. I mean, von Braun literally went on to run NASA. Like, he was the head of NASA. And a lot of his work was the reason that we got to the moon. Yeah, I said that all weird because, like, did we get to the moon? We don't know. But if we did, it's thanks to that dude who was a Nazi. So, you know what these guys did? You know, we got General Patton, Allen Dulles, General Eisenhower. These guys all together, they came up with this great plan. They removed all affiliation that any scientist coming over had with Nazi Germany. So if anyone checked to make sure that they weren't Nazis, they didn't have any paperwork saying that they were. And back then it was super easy because literally like paperwork, so you could just rip it up and be like, oh, it's gone forever. So this is why they actually started calling it Operation Paperclip, because paperclips attached the new pages of their sterilized identification papers, then cleared these men from scrutiny and allowed them to obtain top secret clearances that they needed to work here and do the work that they were doing. So they were like, look, they're not Nazis. They're just scientists. We just found a lot of scientists that weren't actually part of the Nazi program. Totally fine. They're the good Germans. I feel like that's always the excuse that people use. Well, they weren't Nazis. They were the good Germans. Well, no, that's not how this works. If they were the top scientists in Nazi Germany, they were for sure working for Hitler. And actually, many of them had been like photographed with him. They had this like gold cross that was like a high honor bestowed from Hitler himself onto these people. Like they were in his inner circle. A lot of them were in his inner circle. And in fact, they pulled about, I think like 8, from if I understand correctly, people straight from the Nuremberg trials And if you don't know what that is, it's like the trial that all these Nazis stood to basically try them as war criminals. So their idea was like, you work for us or you'll be a war criminal. But we bring them here and give them like nice jobs and just like forget about their past. Like they're literally standing trial for war criminals and we're like, you're fine. You'll be fine as long as you work for us. One of the guys was the Surgeon General of the Third Reich, and he was actually in charge of their vaccine program. And we wanted him to come here and run our vaccine program. So that's exactly what happened. He did that for a little bit. He eventually was found out to be a Nazi, and then he like escaped America and ran to Argentina. If you don't know about Argentina, if you haven't listened to that episode about, I think it's called Hitler Lived, there's this whole theory, and it's not just a theory. So actually, a lot of Germans escaped Germany and went to Argentina. So there's like full towns that speak German. They celebrate German holidays. Like it's fully German there. And some of them have, like the people that live there now, they have pictures of their grandparents on their mantles, like being Nazis, and they tell the stories about how great their grandpa was or like what their grandpa did in the war. And they're like so proud of it because they don't know that, or maybe they do. Maybe they don't care. Maybe they think that they were on the right side. And of course, I'm sure they think that, right? Like everybody thinks their side is right. Anyway, not the point. The point is, in that episode, I go over Hitler escaping Germany and going to Argentina and potentially living out the rest of his life there. Not sure if I believe that one or not, but definitely is a theory that's out there. Anyway, without this operation, the U.S. would have been set back decades on things like rocket and jet aircraft, submarine and ground-launched intercontinental ballistic missiles, high-altitude and pressure G-suits for air crews, and like so much more. Honestly, we would not have the military that we have today without the Nazis coming here and helping us build it. Now, don't get it twisted. These men were Nazis through and through. So many times you'll hear people say like, oh, they're the good Germans, whatever. Absolutely not. If these guys were the best in their fields, and they would not have been loved and appreciated by Hitler the way that they were. And the way that they were appreciated here. We would not have sought them out so heavily if they weren't the best. Then the people that came here during Operation Paperclip, they got to bring their entire families. They got to keep all of their assets, all their money, everything. They basically suffered no consequences at all. Murdering or aiding in the murder of 6 million Jews. Totally fine. Don't worry about that. Just come here and give us all the knowledge in your head. Like, these guys clearly don't care about humanity. They just wanted to win the war. And by these guys, I mean like our CIA, our government, the people that are bringing these people over. Like, they don't care about who died. They don't care. It wasn't their mom or dad. It wasn't their kids. It wasn't their grandma and grandpa. They don't care. You know what they care about? What's the next thing we can learn from these guys? How can we be the best? And with that came Operation Lusty, which was very similar to Operation Paperclip. Kind of was happening at the same time, but is less known and less talked about. So this operation was the scramble for the actual technology. So it's best to have the people to help create the technology and then to teach others around them how to create the technology. But it's second best to actually have the technology itself to attempt to recreate it. They were after things like jets, biological and chemical warfare, rocket aircraft, their silent U-boats, anything that they could get their hands on that was like advanced that we didn't have yet. That's what these guys wanted. And then it kind of helps the guys that they brought over be like, look, we've found this rocket. Now what do we do with it? So let's disassemble it. Let's reassemble it. Let's figure it all out. And you've got the guy right there that built the thing. So it was like a win-win. Out of all of this came Project Chatter. So just 2 years later, in 1947, the Navy actually headed up this project. They were testing and identifying drugs for interrogations and recruitment of intelligence agents. Lieutenant Dr. Charles Savage was in charge of this project. Savage had graduated from Yale and Pritzker Medical School at the University of Chicago. So he had like some pretty good knowledge about what was going on. These experiments were held at the Naval Institute in Bethesda, Maryland, and they were basically trying to use high doses of mescaline as truth serum. What they found out was that mescaline is not a good truth serum. Then they decided that they should test LSD on severely depressed military patients. They knew these people would suffer from pretty negative effects, but they just didn't care. Again, it's not them. They don't have to deal with it. They're just testing this theory, this idea. Outside of LSD, Savage used scopolamine. He would start the patients on 20 micrograms of LSD. And actually, this was the first government-funded project to use LSD on human subjects. So this was unheard of. So he would start them at 20 micrograms, which I found is kind of like a normal dose. I don't know much about LSD, so I Googled it. Google doesn't really know how much a normal dose of LSD is. So then I called all my druggy friends. I don't have very many, actually. It was really hard to find out. I think that this is like a pretty standard dose, 20 micrograms. Sometimes it's just 10 micrograms, just depends. So and then he would increase their dosage daily until they reached the point of psychophysiological changes that they could actually observe. So yes, you take LSD and you're like, whoa, some crazy things are happening, right? But he wanted to actually see them going through this, because sometimes you can be high on LSD and then not have any outside symptoms. As any good scientist would, he wanted to test quote unquote normal people versus depressed people. So he would give normal people, that's his words, not mine, non-depressed people, he would give LSD, and then also depressed people, just to see what the difference was and if it made any difference, if it cured depression. He noted that he found no specific therapeutic advantages in depression when using LSD. But this dude was a savage, as his name suggests. So when this guy was admitted to the hospital with depression, and then he told the story that his mom was going to lose her house and his sister was going to lose her job, and he felt helpless because he couldn't do anything about it, blah, blah, blah. They turned him over to Dr. Savage, this random guy. And Dr. Savage was like, oh, you know what's going to cure your depression and make you forget about the fact that your mom is going to lose her house and your sister's going to lose her job? LSD. Let's get you high. So he dosed this guy, and his dose was increased day after day after day until it was 100 micrograms, which then resulted in the guy suffering from a schizophrenic reaction. He had such a poor reaction. And Dr. Savage was like, oh, well, didn't work yet again. He already knew that it wouldn't work because he's done it on other people, but this is just one example. But still, Dr. Savage said that hallucinations caused by LSD could be used in psychotherapy. He just didn't know how yet. They also were trying to test the difference between synthetic and natural drugs, helping in interrogation. So I don't know how far he got because there's not a lot of information about that. There's a lot more information about him using it on depressed patients versus him using it in interrogations. But this whole project ended in 1953 when it merged with the CIA program called Project MK Ultra. So now the Navy was out, CIA was in. This leads us to the next project, which was Project Artichoke.
It's back to school season, football season, and life gets stressful again season. Which begs the question, isn't it time you had an edible to relax? IndiCloud has finally done it. They've captured the flavors of childhood in their Soda Shop series Delta 9 Gummy. Get those strawberry, grape, and fruit punch flavors while you also get high as... IndiCloud has all your favorite dispensary-grade cannabis products shipped right to your door discreetly across all 50 states. Between their beast mode vapes, their exotic flower choices, specialty flavored wraps, and their pre-rolls and concentrates, IndiCloud are the experts at getting your cannabis to you and getting you very, very high. And you can find it all at indicloud.co. Head to indacloud.co/fall24 and get discreet delivery on top-shelf THC products for 30% off on your first order. That's indaclow.co/fall24 to snag 30% off your first order.
So Chatter may have been the first program to use LSD, but they were quickly followed up by Project Bluebird. I know you're thinking, like, what? Bluebird? I thought it was Artichoke. It was Bluebird first, and it changed to Artichoke. The idea was to determine whether a person could be involuntarily made to perform an act of attempted assassination or espionage. This project was specifically used, or was supposed to be specifically used, for political purposes. So if you have ever seen the movie Zoolander with Ben Stiller, they're like kind of making fun of this, where they hypnotize him, and then once a certain song plays, he goes crazy and he's supposed to assassinate a political figure, right? And it's like a funny movie and everybody loves it, whatever. So this is what they were trying to do with Project Artichoke. They wanted to know if, quote, can we get control of an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will and even against fundamental laws of nature, such as self-preservation, end quote. So this project started in 1948, although some sources say it started in 1950. I think that the initial idea was in 1948, whereas the actual project itself with like the candidates and everybody started in 1950. So that's where the discrepancy is. The goal was to test if they could make someone complete an act of assassination, espionage, without their knowledge. The idea was that they did not want you to know that you just killed somebody. They wanted to create a sleeper cell, a super soldier type person. They were doing all of this under the guise of interrogation tactics. In fact, that's what they told everyone they were doing. I'm talking like other departments of the CIA, the FBI, the military, the government, everybody. They were just trying to learn new interrogation tactics to get more information out of people, which I feel like was always the disguise. So like that was the disguise for Chatter, that was the disguise for this, maybe also for MK Ultra. They just did not want a Soviet to come over and start messing around with them and then not know how to get the information, extract the information from them. But no one actually knew the truth as to what the CIA was doing with this project. In the CIA documents, it says, quote, "It is extremely important that any action by CIA in these fields is restricted to the knowledge of a minimum number of persons on a top secret basis to prevent compromise and unfavorable repercussions," end quote. So they were really, really trying to keep this thing under wraps. And they were conducting these experiments all over the world to try to keep it more hush-hush. And most of their participants, by the way, were not willing candidates. They wanted potential intelligence agents, defectors, refugees, prisoners of war, and others. Not quite sure what others means, but they were like, yeah, we're open to other people as well. Which I just mean, I think they were like, whatever, whoever we dose in the wild, we'll see what they do too. It's crazy. They wanted to start by interrogating people, utilizing a polygraph to determine the actual defectors and agents. They would give the candidates, psychoactive drugs and expose them to hypnosis at the same time. So you're on LSD. At first, they started with morphine. Eventually, they started using LSD. But they initially started when they went to Japan, which we'll talk about in a minute. They were using only morphine and hypnosis. And then when they went to Camp King, which again we'll get into in just a minute, they were using morphine, hypnosis, and then also shock therapy and sleep deprivation. And then when they came back to the US, they started using all these other drugs to include like cocaine, LSD, marijuana, ketamine, peyote, so much. So they were just trying to see like what could they get away with, or which of these drugs or which of these combination of drugs would get them the result that they wanted. So they even like wrote out all of their goals for this experiment, which I think that helps in any experiment, but they had a lot of them. So we're going to go down the list. They wanted to condition people to not give away any information to any unauthorized source. They also didn't want them to commit any act against a foreign or domestic enemy unless they were told to do so. They wanted to condition an unwilling subject to perform a task for their benefit, but they wanted this conditioning to happen in a short amount of time, like a couple hours or a day or so. But this act that they would commit could be at any time. So they're going to condition you to do an act, whatever the act is, kill somebody potentially. I'm going to condition you now, and then when I'm ready for you, I'll say the secret word, blue hot dogs or whatever, right? They wanted to know if they could make a person commit an action contrary to their basic moral principles. Most people are not okay killing somebody. So could they make somebody kill somebody? Or could they make somebody steal information from a country that they actually loved? Like, could they bring a Soviet over here, send them back after they've conditioned them to do this bidding, and then get information out of that person? They wanted to know if they could seize a subject and in the space of an hour or two, have that person crash an airplane, wreck a train, etc. This is what the CIA wrote out as a goal. I'm not creating any of this. They were wondering, could they make somebody crash an airplane? Could they make somebody wreck a train? They wanted to know, or they wanted to have someone unwilling or otherwise travel a long distance, commit a specific act, and return to them bringing some sort of documentation or materials proving that they actually did the act. Basically, they wanted to know if they could condition this person and then have them travel for a while under the control successfully. They wanted to know if this control could combat fatigue. That's interesting. Could they guarantee amnesia under any and all conditions? So you have to forget what you've been told, what you've done while you're under this condition. They also wanted to know if they could alter a person's personality and then just for how long that would last. They wanted to know if they could develop tests to determine if an enemy had been controlled by similar conditions. Like, are you here to steal from us? Are you under this mind control? Could they detect the control by using the control? So basically, I'm going to try to put you under this mind control hypnosis and then see if you will tell me that you're under this hypnosis already from a different country, specifically the Soviet Union. They were very interested in other countries' techniques, so one of the goals was to see if they could make a conditioned subject reveal how they were conditioned. So if they got a Soviet that had been conditioned, was under control, how did that happen? Was it by drugs, torture, fatigue, other techniques? What did they do to you to create you into the sleeper cell? Could they make it unwilling participants willing participants, then transfer control to other agents in the field? That's creating a sleeper agent. How long could they keep the conditioned person in a suggestive state without any aid or reinforcement? What's the fastest way to induce a condition with drugs or without any mechanical aids? Basically, they wanted to know if this could be done in the field. Put somebody under their control in the field quickly and then send them back to wherever they came from. Could they induce a condition in a simple, fast way that even untrained agents could do? So you and me, we don't know anything. They're here, just give so-and-so this drug, and now they're under your control until you tell them whatever, and a code word or a code phrase or something, and then now they forgot everything. They're gone now. They're just back to being civilians or whoever they were. Could an odorless, colorless gas activate a person? Could you have them smell something or have a gas injected into the room and that activates them? They wanted to know the full details on the sleep-inducing machine, which I don't know what that was. And lastly, they wanted to know if someone under their control could point out specific things on a map, like locations, or if they could do a detailed drawing or sketch or do detailed plans. That way, like if you've been in this place but we haven't been in, we want you to draw it out so we know where we're going. So like in Zoolander, where they had the song that activated the sleeper agent, so that's what they were trying to figure out. Like, could they do this with a gas? Could they do it with a word or a phrase or a song potentially? Like, how could they activate their sleeper agents once they've conditioned them? And then how do we condition them? All of this, they had a really challenging time finding a doctor that would conduct these experiments. But as the CIA does, they did find someone. The CIA used their black budget for these experiments because they didn't want anybody to know what was going on. It was a top priority to keep this thing under wraps. So they're like, oh, we'll just keep it off the books. As they started their experiments in Japan, they really wanted to test all these things on prisoners of war that were out there, and agents would try to extract like the most information possible because they were on the wrong side of our war, right? So they wanted to go out there and use these techniques against the prisoners of war in Japan. They also were trying to create a truth serum, which they did almost create, not quite. So they were trying to use this truth serum on the victims as well. They were first using this combination of amytal sodium and benzedrine as their truth serum, but that didn't last very long. Around 1951, they decided to not only use this project defensively, but offensively. So they moved their experiments from Japan to continue them at Camp King in Germany. Camp King was an interrogation center for the German Air Force during World War II. And then after World War II, it stayed an interrogation center, but now the U.S. Army had moved in, and it was our interrogation center now. Basically what we said was, you guys did some really cool things. I mean, not great that you killed a bunch of people. We are just going to take everything that you've done and use it for our gain now. And that's exactly what they did. But they chose Camp King because they felt like they could conduct any kind of experiment they wanted. It was off-site, kind of like this out of sight, out of mind type situation. Also, they were very close to the Soviets, so they were hoping that maybe they could, again, use this offensively and try to gather information from the Soviet Union. And of course, they didn't want to report any of what they were doing because they were trying to keep this thing as top secret as they could. And they weren't only using hypnosis and drugs, but electric shock therapy came into play at Camp King, like I said earlier. And they were using sleep deprivation to try to get what they wanted, or try to induce this hypnosis state better. So there are rumors that the Russians did a sleep deprivation experiment in the late 1940s, so right around this same time. But I don't know if that's just rumors. It's been proven false on the internet, but just because something's been proven false on the internet doesn't actually mean that it's fake. It just means that they don't want you to know that it's real. So I take all that with a grain of salt. I'm thinking that this is actually what triggered this idea for the sleep deprivation. Because MK Ultra was triggered because they believed that the Russians were controlling people's minds. So they're like, well, we want to control people's minds, right? If they can do it, we can do it. And at this point, like, the US felt kind of behind, like always trying to catch up until they got all the Nazi scientists. But they thought that Russia was so far ahead of them and they were doing all these other things. So let's throw deep sleep deprivation in there because we've heard that the Russians are doing that. We heard that the Russians want to go to the moon, so we're going to go to the moon. Like, all these dumb things. They just, like, whose dick is bigger? But something really strange happened. So for about 6 months in 1951, no one heard anything about this project. Almost as if it had stopped altogether. But then, almost out of the blue, on August 20th of 1951, the project reappeared with its new name. So now it was called Project Artichoke, and it was brought back to the States. The CIA then started to find people in the States that they deemed enemies of the state to conduct experiments on. And they really ramped it up. they weren't just using a few drugs and hypnosis and shock therapy. Now they're using like morphine, cocaine, peyote, LSD, mescaline, heroin, basically any drug they can get their hands on. That's what they're going to use. The question that they were trying to answer was which drug will give us the result we want fastest. They found that LSD gave them the most likable results. Something about the hallucinations along with the hypnosis created like the perfect environment in the brain to mold it. And because they were seeing results with LSD, they wanted to keep these experiments up. So what did they do next? They increased their dosages, of course. So they had higher dosages, they had more injections, whatever they thought would help create the perfect sleeper cell, help them create the perfect situation to create a sleeper cell. That's what they were doing. This is about the time when the truth serum concoction changed to sodium pentothal. They were using this with hypnosis as a way to control these people's minds, right? So sodium pentothal has since been banned because of how harmful and potent it is. So now we're not allowed to use it. But then they're like, this is our truth serum. So they were numbing these people and almost killing them with the sodium pentothal, then giving them peyote or LSD and putting them under hypnosis. And it was, probably melting these guys' brains for sure. They were going to the extremes basically to get what they wanted. They didn't care what it cost. They were just straight up torturing these people. And not only that, but they were even like drugging their own agents without their knowledge, which we'll talk about that more in MK Ultra because they do that then too. They wanted to know what a person would act like if they didn't know they were dosed. So how are you going to react when you don't know that you're high on LSD? Apparently, they even kept one agent dosed on LSD for 77 days. Like straight. How do you do that? Like with weekends? I don't know. Because that's not a good friend if they're dosing you with LSD. Anyway, I don't know. After 1953, we don't have any more information on this project. The CIA does maintain that the project didn't end until 1956, so 3 years later. However, both of these things tell me that I think it went on much longer than 1956. It is thought that just like Project Chatter, Project Artichoke turned into MK Ultra. Because MK Ultra did start in 1953, which is right when both projects went silent and ended. Maybe they realized that these two projects were so similar that if they just had one project, it made more sense. They spend less money. Now they can test everything all at the same time, and they just keep using LSD. I don't know. All I know is that the CIA was incredibly interested in mind control, and we're going to get more into that next week with the MK Ultra episode. So, until then, my friends, stay skeptical, and I will see you all next week. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.